Hey, folks. Just a quick note before you get to the episode with myself and Daniel. We had a little bit of internet shenanigans on the line. Big surprise, recording this during Mercury retrograde and so on. So I think that the audio is still super listenable, but there are a few spots where some words drop out and stuff like that. Having checked it, I think you won't miss too much, and the rest of the conversation is totally worth it. So with that, I will say on with the show. Welcome to the Hermit's Lamp podcast. I want to give a big shout out to the fine people who are supporting the Patreon. Not only are they making this happen, which certainly I feel very supported by that process, but also they've started getting all sorts of great new things. I've been recording extra Patreon exclusives with the guests who've been on. We've had Jen Zart on talking about some astrological aspects. We've had Al Cummins talking about geomancy and pizza magic. And we've had the Stacking Skulls crew on talking about their musical influences, both spiritually and ridiculously in their lives. And all of this stuff is only for people who are supporting the Patreon. So please consider it. Think about how many hours of this podcast you've listened to, and jump over to patreon.com/thehermitslamp. If you pledge $5 an episode, you will get access to all of that good stuff, but there are perks at many levels as well. Thanks for supporting it. Enjoy the episode. Welcome to the Hermit's Lamp podcast. I'm hanging out today with Daniel Foor, and Daniel is Ifa priest and has done all sorts of wonderful work along the lines of ancestral healing, and Ancestral Medicine is the name of the book that he has out. And, he and I have a lot of similarities in our practices and the kinds of things we're interested in. So, lots of people have been suggesting I have him on for a while, and well, today's the day. So welcome, Daniel. Thanks for being here.
Thanks so much. It's good to be here.
For people who might not know who you are, who are you? What are you about?
Yeah, well, to locate myself a bit, I'm a 40-year-old white cisgendered American living in Western North Carolina, from Ohio originally, but traveled a good amount, but live in the States and have a PhD in psychology. I'm a licensed therapist, so I have a background in mental health, but mostly I'm a ritualist, and I've been training with different kinds of teachers and traditions for over 20 years now, and started out with more shamanic, pagan, eclectic, magical things, and migrated into involvement with Islam and Sufism, Buddhist practice, and then circled back to involvement with indigenous systems and earth honoring traditions. And in the last decade have been immersed in West African Ifa practice, lineages in the Americas and also in West Africa. And so I'm an initiate of Ifa and Obatala, Shun, and Egungun, priesthood, Ogboni, and lineage of Oluwafalo Adesanya, Aboyede, and Remo in Ogun State. So I've been 4 times to Nigeria, and that's one influence on my practice. But mostly I teach and guide non-dogmatic, inclusive, animist, ancestor-focused ritual practice. The last 2 years or so have shifted to training others, which has been really satisfying. After years of doing more public-facing ritual, I do some of that, but mostly I'm training other people in how to guide the work. And I have developed a specialization in repair work with blood lineage ancestors, but I also operate from a broader animist or earth honoring framework that isn't limited to just that. So, and I'm a dad. I'm married and love the earth here and live in the American South, which is kind of strange, but also okay. Yeah.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
So, I mean, I guess my first question for you is, when did you start feeling the ancestral stuff calling you?
Well, my own lineages are German, English, Irish, early settler, colonialist in North America, and so I didn't inherit any religious or spiritual framework or culture that was of value to me in any conscious way as a young person. And so my first teachers in shamanic practice, Becky and Crow at the Church of Earth Healing in the late 90s, nudged me to get to know my ancestors ritually. And it was really impactful, actually. I was surprised by it. I'd never thought about them really before that. And I ended up assisting with an older ancestral guide or teacher, my father's father, who had taken his own life, and just showing up for that work, which was powerful, and it was a catalyst for me to research, do a lot of depth genealogy research about my own family history, and that dovetailed in with my training as a therapist. So I was in a period of connecting a lot of dots and valuing my own heritage in a grounding way, not in like some awkward go white people way, but like in a way that helped me to reclaim what is beautiful about European, Northern Western European cultures, and including earlier pre-Roman, pre-Christian magics and lineages. And so I ran with that ritually, have guided 120 maybe multi-day ancestral healing intensives since 2005 in that work. So I spent about 6 or 7 years getting grounded with all of it myself, and started to help other people with it. And it just organically developed as a specialization. And I tend to be a little obsessive about a thing. When I'm into it, I'll do that like crazy until it's, yeah.
Yeah, I think it's interesting how, because I do a lot of ancestral work as well,
Mm-hmm.
we do ancestral divination work and, ancestral sort of healing and lineage healing and so on with
Mm-hmm.
people. I've been teaching it with my friend Carrie. We developed this system of people working with charm casting as a tool to start to get into that work. And, we've been traveling around and teaching it, everywhere. We were in China last year teaching it and stuff like that with people. And, I think the thing that sort of stands out in your story that I think stands out everywhere is so often like the last little bit, the last few generations, it's kind of wonky, or like there's not a lot of connection or living connection. Like even, it wasn't until last year that I found out that my grandmother read tea leaves when she was alive. She's been on for like 12 years and just never came up before. She never talked about it. My mom just never brought it up, not for any particular reason, but it just was never a thing. Even though that's the same grandmother who bought me a tarot deck when I was like 13 long ago.
Right. Of course she did.
Never talked about it, right? But how, often when you kind of go back, a few generations or somewhere a bit deeper, there are these sort of more evolved isn't the word that I super like, but like more grounded, more helpful, ancestors with a sort of more capacity to be really guides and assist you in this process, right?
Yeah, often where those cutoffs happen vary so widely from one demographic or even one individual to another. And I know in a lot of my own lineages, it's been over 1,000 years since anyone during life had a culturally reinforced and supported framework for honoring the ancestors. And so the older ones, the ones even before that, are quite available. So it's not, I could reinforce some kind of orphan victim, culturally damaged white person narrative, but it's not that sexy or useful. And so at a certain point, you're just like, well, you pick up the pieces where they're at and get the fire going again. And the older ancestors are happy to do that. And so even if someone comes from a really recently and before that, culturally fragmented set of lineages, the ancestors are still available, the older ones, And the main repair orientation of practice that I encourage people to try on at first is to partner with those older ancestors and with them assist any of the dead who are not yet well, any of the ones between those older ones in the present who are not yet really well seated, really vibrant, help them to become well seated ancestors. So the dead change. It's very important for us living folks to not fix them in some static condition.
Mm-hmm.
Just because people were a pain in the ass or really, culturally in the weeds during life doesn't mean they're doomed to that condition forever. They can really change and become not only like not ghosty, but they can become dynamic, engaged, useful allies for cultural healing work in the present.
Mm-hmm.
So,
yeah, I think it's it's a misconception that a lot of people have that they automatically change on crossing over.
sure, yeah, that's a different,
right?
different confusion.
And then the other side of that is, they can change, but it might take a bunch of work, even if they didn't change, right?
Yeah, totally. Yeah, both are true. Yeah,
yeah.
The idea that just dying makes you wise and loving and kind is really hazardous, actually, as a worldview. So because it'll lead to a view of, I've seen it at times in pagan circles as well, where it's like, oh, the ancestors are good. Let's invoke them all. Okay, here are all the names of my ancestors and the pictures, and let me light a candle and strongly invoke all of them.
Yeah.
Well, I hope your invocation doesn't work. Because if it does, you're going to get a mixed bag. Because your people are, if they're well, awesome. But if they're not yet well and your invocation works, then what you have is some not yet well ghosty energy in your space.
For sure, right? And some of those spirits can be pretty tumultuous, if they're...
Oh, no doubt. Yeah.
Here, I have one grandfather that I continue to work with who sort of work on, let's put it,
right.
Some time, and they're still not ready to be, front and center in anything because they just so caught up in so much deep trauma in their own life and in the generations before them. And,
one of the things that I won't say it's unique to how I approach it, but it's emphasized in how I approach ancestor work, which isn't across the board, is I take a very lineage-based approach. Like I don't even really encourage necessarily relating with individual ancestors that much. So in the case of someone, not to speak to your specific case necessarily, but let's say someone's grandmother is really quite entrenched in the unwell, ghosty range of wellness. My strategy is to make sure that her mother and her mother and her mother and her mother and the lineage of women before them on back through time to the ancient, weird, witchy, deity-like grandmothers, that whole lineage is deeply well. And the repair happens from the older ones toward the present. And so once you have the parent of the one who is quite troubled in a deeply well condition and the whole lineage before them deeply well, as a group energy, asking them to intervene to address the rowdy, ghosty grandparent tends to be, it can be more effective simply because there's a re-anchoring of the rogue individuality in a bigger system, in a collective energy. And there's a respect for seniority or hierarchy by having that person's elders be the ones to round them up. So that's I share that because in the West generally, I find that people tend to conceive of ancestor reverence primarily as the relating of one individual to another individual, and some of the lineage or group level aspects of it can get lost or they're not as emphasized, and so I find that's important nuance to include. And then another is, and we've spoken to it, is just the way in which one's ancestors are not at all just the remembered dead, the recent ones, that they include the vast majority of them are living before remembered names. And that's helpful for people who are like, my family are abusive trolls. I'm like, okay, I believe you. But I think what you mean to say is all the generations you know about, which is probably not more than 2 or 3.
Yeah.
And so it's like you're at the ocean at a windy, cloudy day, and you're saying, oh, the ocean is tumultuous. Well, I believe it is right there at the beach, but the ocean's a big place. Yeah.
Yeah.
So expanding our frame for who we mean when we say ancestors can be helpful too.
Mm-hmm. For sure. Yeah, and there's lots of times where, we'll make offerings or do work with all of those ancestors, right?
Mm-hmm.
With the egg room, right? With everybody, right?
Yeah.
In those ways and so on, right? Yeah. I mean, it's interesting how it's really interesting to sort of make sure that you're looking at those things. And, some of my best ancestral allies have been gone, 300-400 years, right? Or longer.
For sure. Yeah, totally. Yeah. Good.
They arrive and they're just like, yes, you're the beacon of light amongst all of these things, and let's radiate that out to everybody afterwards and anchor further and deeper, right?
Yeah,
Really.
for sure.
Mm-hmm.
Mm.
So when you're doing work with people, are you mostly focused on, because a lot of people come to ancestor work because they want to get messages and receive stuff and do
Right.
kind of stuff, right? And
Yeah.
I mean, I think that can be fruitful too. I enjoy that kind of work as well. But that's not really what we're talking about here either, right? I mean, not explicitly, right?
Yeah. If we say like, what's the point? There are a lot of different motivations that can drive someone to want to engage their ancestors. A most common one is, I'm suffering. Will this help?
Mm-hmm.
That's legit. Sometimes it will help indirectly. Sometimes it will help directly because the source of the suffering is unmetabolized intergenerational trouble that's directly connected to ancestral interference. And so sometimes it can help in different ways. Another motivator for the work is seeking life guidance, as the ancestors have insight into our unique destiny and can help us to move into closer alignment with that, our unique instructions or soul level work in the world. As you know, in Yoruba culture, we sometimes talk about the world as the marketplace and Orun, or the spirit world, as home. And so if you forget your shopping list, working with the ancestors can be like, let us show you. You said this, and this, and be like, oh yeah, okay, thanks. And so that's helpful to not waste our lives. And ancestors can be great for being resourced parents or supporters in family. Like they're especially good with all the family sphere, the domestic sphere, like being a responsible family human. And they're also good allies for cultural healing. A lot of the racism and colonialism and sexism and other kinds of cultural toxicity and garbage and bad capitalism that we're stewed in and trying to get out from underneath and help transform, those are troubles created by the ancestors. Like they're implicated in the trouble. And so they have appropriately a hand in resolving the trouble as well. And so they're great allies for, by whatever form, activism, cultural change work, all that. And so I really think that working closely with one's ancestors helps cultural change makers to up their game, so to speak. So that's another motivation. And this is, I guess it's related to the one about destiny, but inspired a bit from Yoruba frameworks, the collective energy, wisdom of the ancestors is associated strongly with the earth. Like Onile is, the earth is like the calabash that holds the souls of the dead. And because the earth is associated with accountability and moral authority, and is the witness of all interactions, and in that way also the ancestors carry that same quality of accountability. And I think whether or not people can consciously own it, some part of us craves accountability. Like we want to be seen and checked when needed. There's something really our daughter almost made it to the top of the steps. Like the door was open the other day. She's 9 months old, but we caught her. It was good. It's way better than had we not held her in that moment. Right. And there's a way in which that kind of love and connectivity is like, oh, I'm not alone in the universe. Mm-hmm. If I crawl to the top of the steps, someone will pick me up. So we want that, and the ancestors bring that as well when we live with them.
I think it's a thing that especially, my experience, people in Western culture struggle with too, right? This sort of willingness to acknowledge an authority or an awareness or a position that's sort of above them in a way that they can allow in to say, you know what, actually, we really do know what's better for you in this moment.
Oh yeah.
Or,
It's
actually, you know what, my friend, going down that road has nothing to do with your destiny or what have you, right? Or,
oh
hey,
yeah.
here's your fault in this mess that you're trying to put on this other person, right?
Oh yeah. No, people look, I'm a teacher also, and so often it's great and fine. And sometimes people are idealizing in awkward ways. I'm like, oh, don't do that. Don't do that. But it's whatever, fine. It's fine. It tends to burn out and even out. And also sometimes people are really just not okay with anything resembling a power differential or the student teacher relationship.
Right.
And it's tiring a little as a teacher. And because there is a difference between telling someone just what to do in an authoritative way and also saying like, well, do you want to learn a thing? Because I know this skill. Like, what do you want to tell me how it goes? Because so yeah, it is I think it's a function of power so often being abused that people understandably have mistrust. Yeah. So I have compassion for it. And also the piece around hierarchy and authority is challenging. In the coming months, some dear friends are going to Nigeria to do initiations. And I was talking to them last night and I was like, in the nicest possible way, your main job as the initiate is to obey. Just like the ritual is done to you. Nobody really cares what you think about it. And it's totally fine.
Here, stand there.
Right. Yeah, totally. Sit down, drink it, eat it, say thank you. Like, yeah, like you're the thing being consecrated. Your input is not needed.
Yeah. No,
nothing personal. Next time you go back, then you can have an opinion.
Yeah.
So,
and even then,
just mostly you get one small vote.
Yeah. No, for sure. Yeah, well, I see it with people who come for readings of all kinds, but people who approach getting Dilagun readings and stuff like that, and and the orishas come through and they're like, oh, you know what, don't drink this year, don't whatever, don't get tattooed, don't no red beans for you. And they're just like, what do you mean? Like, I don't understand. It's like, well, you don't
obey.
Right. What is the understanding? I mean, in a lot of that situation, in some of those situations, the understanding is more obvious, right?
Right.
Conversation with the person who say, well, it seems like you kind of have this kind of challenge, and this is kind of a thing that might counter that. And like, okay, maybe. But other times it's just energetic or on other levels that it's just like, it's kind of it's an equivalent of saying, hey, carry this citrine with you for the next year. It's going to help your energy, but it's in a different structure that people don't relate to in the same way, right?
For sure, yeah.
And then they're like, but I don't want to be told what to do. I'm like, well, what else are you going to do?
You just paid me to do that. So.
Yeah, you asked, right? I wouldn't worry about it.
No. But some part of us does. Some part of us really, I think, wants to be told what to do. And that could go awry. And I'm not saying it's entirely healthy impulse, but there's something about accountability and structure and community and limits that's actually really intimate.
Yeah.
And if you can't hear and accept no, your yes is meaningless. And so there's something that's precious, sweet about protocol and tradition and about structure. Yeah.
I also think that a lot of people don't really, faith is a really complicated and difficult thing for a lot of people too, and especially when entering a new tradition,
Sure.
And I think that part of what we're talking about here is also a matter of faith, right? What is your faith in the ancestors or the orisha or whatever, and how do you sustain that faith through being deeply challenged by them around stuff?
Yeah, and for me, look, I was involved with different orisha teachers in the States, American for the most part, and it didn't work out that well for the most part. I mean, complicated, but I I felt like there was a lot of restrictive and unhealthy and kind of confused energy around it. And I had an opportunity to go to Nigeria to reset some of the initiation like things that had happened here. So I took a risk on it, and I'm like, oh, this is either going to be like the final straw or some breakthrough. Like, let's pray for the latter. And I saw kindness and non-dogmatic group community. Like in my Ifa initiation, there were men aged like 80 to 5 holding space, like in 20, 30 people there. And people are teasing each other, playing, having a good time. Like the people were well human beings. They seemed happy. And so that relaxed, teasing, heart-aware energy, I'm like, oh, good. This is what I was looking for. And it helped for me. It helped me to trust and just not fight the system. I'm like, just tell me what to do. Just, okay, eat the pig tongue. Okay, give me a bite or whatever it is. Just tell me what to do. So, yeah, it's great.
Just gotta, just to get some people would bring their, like elderly Cuban elders to the store, come pick up stuff. They're here in Toronto to do a thing, and they'd bring this person to the store, right? And, my Spanish is not great, and their English was not great. And we'd know some like Yoruban words in common or whatever. And you would see how sweet and genuine and nice they were. And then they'd notice that I've got plants growing at the front of the store for working with religion. And they'd be like, oh, Alamo. I'm like, yeah. And we have this like sort of pigeon conversation of a bunch of other things. And mostly what it would be is our hearts being open, all of us sharing our love of this religion and these spirits, and the continuity of that. And it was such a beautiful and uplifting experience, even though there wasn't a lot of words that was associated with it. There was so much communication happening at other levels. And you could, I could feel my Shango just being happy about it, feel whoever they're made to just being happy about it and so on. It's so uplifting in that way, right? But
it's good. It's one of the things, and we had mentioned in our previous chat about my talk on practicing the traditions of other people's ancestors, and I respect it a lot about the necessary and important dialogues around cultural appropriation, and especially, not only, but especially around respecting different Native North American or First Nations, you say, traditions, and being mindful about what the conditions of involvement, if that's open to non-Native people, are, etc. And what's important to understand is those same parameters are not universal, and how cultures are shared and understood from one part of the world to another really vary. And Yoruba culture, for example, is generally an open system. Yoruba people, in my experience in Yoruba land, I've never had anyone feel off about me being there and training in orisha, except for the Christians who are like, why don't you want Jesu? I'm like, we have Jesu where I'm at. It's like, it's fine. You like, go Jesu, but it's not why I'm here. And one of the things that is important though is it's family. Like you're stepping into a family, a spiritual family. It's not like a, hey bro, thanks for the culture. I'm gonna go back and set up shop. I got what I need. And so when your teachers hit you up for money, it's family. That's what, like, you can't be part of a family and have a bunch of stuff and then other people don't have something and you don't share it. And so it's not like you're getting exploited. I mean, that also happens, but just the ethic of sharing and supporting one another. If people don't want that, then they might not want to get involved. Because most indigenous systems that I know of that are open to people not of that blood ancestry hold things in a family-oriented way. There's intimacy with that, but there's also connectivity, reciprocity, accountability. Yeah.
And so my immediate family where I was initiated is in the Detroit area, and my elders are in Miami, and like. But like when especially when the Detroit folks are doing work, especially bigger things like making priests, I always show up. Like, it's like when they're doing the work and you're like, oh, it's so inconvenient for me to take 4 or 5 days off and go down there and help out, right? And it's like, yeah, it's inconvenient, and it's time off work and it's whatever, but it's what those people did for me, right?
Yeah.
And it's what allows all of that continue, and it's a chance to to also sustain those connections and sit and eat together and sit and joke together and complain about cleaning up after the animals together and whatever, right? Like, it's just
Right.
part of it, right? And in the absence of being willing to engage that community element of it, right? It's pretty. If you don't have the community element in one way or another, especially in the Orisha tradition, you don't really have much of anything.
It's true with the tradition. In my experience, it's very communal, and there are a lot of ritual domains of activity you just can't pull off solo.
Yeah.
And it's just it's a lot of hard work. It's a lot of heavy lifting, and for people who have worked with psychoactives, there's a certain kind of feeling among a group after a long, successful, like all-night acid trip when the sun's coming up. It's sort of like, oh, we've just gone through something together.
Mm-hmm.
And minus the LSD, there can be a sense after multi-day ritual of a strong kind of magic and beauty and intimacy that's shared through all the effort and all the devotion
Mm-hmm.
that it takes to keep old lineages of practice alive. Yeah.
For sure. And I think it's, one of the other points that I think was super important. It's been a while since I listened to that talk, and we'll link to it in the show notes because it was a good talk. Folks should go back and listen to it.
Mm-hmm.
It is also the fact that, like, these are living traditions, right? Like, they have continuity.
Yeah.
And there's a big difference between hey, we're gonna call up some Greek deities and see what happens, and see what happens sounds dismissive. I don't mean it in that way. And there's no continuity to ancient Greece, in a particular way, versus there are people who've been practicing these traditions from person to person to person all the way through to now, and you can actually go and ask those people, and they can answer you as to what's done and how it's done and why it's done.
Yeah, it's true. Like, people, if they don't know something, would be in the habit of divining on it. But I wouldn't want someone to not go to flight school and then divine on how to fly the plane.
Right?
It's not. Yeah.
Yeah. So there's that great proverb, which I'm sure which is, "Don't ask what you already know," right?
Right.
And I think that there's a sort of corollary to that, which is there are things you just shouldn't ask because you should already know them, right?
Right.
We don't need to ask if we do this thing because we know we don't.
Yeah.
We know that Oshun won't take this as an offering. We know that we don't do this kind of thing. We know that, you don't ask if you could rob a bank because the answer is already no.
Right. And there's a beautiful essay on Olugbomeji of a child being asked to divine, and their parents died young, and so they didn't get the information, and so they invoke their ancestors and bring a lot of humility and wing it, and it turns out fine. And I think that there's also is kind of an implicit message, and don't do that again. Don't pull that card too many times.
Right.
Then go train.
Yeah,
so,
for sure, right?
So it's both. Like the deities have kindness and benevolence, and also careful.
Yeah. And I was traveling, and I got a call that a friend of mine was at death's door in the hospital, basically, right? And and I was just literally at a rest stop, gassing up the car when I checked my phone in the middle of New York State, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I was just like, all right. And so I went and kind of looked around for some stuff, and it's like, there's nothing. There's nothing I can really sort of put together here. So I just collected a bunch of white flowers, and it's really hilly, right? So I just took them to a spot where I felt like it was appropriate for Obatala.
Mm-hmm.
And I was like, Obatala, this is all I have today. I'm here. This is the situation. I need you to accept these and intercede in the situation. And you can get away with that, but that's not practicing the tradition, and that's not gonna, as you say, not gonna fly all the time, right?
Yeah.
When you're at home, you can do all sorts of other things, and you have your your shrines, or your ancestors, or wherever you're working with, right? But you know, they will accept these things because they do understand circumstance, and they're not tyrannical about it, right? But like you say, you don't want that to be your way of practicing it forever.
I spent years, oh, I don't know, not quite 20 years, not involved in a really dedicated way in one set tradition. I was training with different traditions for a period of time and would definitely learn stuff and would develop my own ashe or whatever, but I wasn't like embracing one fully as an operating system.
Yeah.
And what I learned that it's possible to do it that way. It was actually really helpful to me that it's possible to go deep with one's own ancestors, to go deep with the spirits of the land where you're at, and to get to know them, and to get clarity about your own destiny, and to just constellate in the different powers and forces and spirits that are going to help you to do that. And I also that there's a loneliness in going it solo as well. There's like a freedom and a loneliness both. And it drove me eventually to, I spent almost 10 years involved in orisha practice and Yoruba ways before I decided to initiate. And it's like a long, slow dating process. There wasn't a lot of charisma. It was like, oh, you're the last one left standing, and we have a ton of compatibility. Why are we not doing this? Like, okay, I guess we're going to do this. So we just had the high match on the dating, religious dating profile site. So I'm like, oh, maybe we should try this. And I haven't regretted it at all. It's been it's been a relief. The sense for me is of being held in a bigger frame. And it's not what I teach publicly. I'm not publicly offering services in that way, even though there are certain ones I could in integrity. I'm still in training. I'm still trying to learn Yoruba language, and it's especially with West African orientation of practice. It's such an oral language-based tradition, especially Ifa practice in particular. So, so I'm trying to I think if you're not ancestrally of a tradition, the standards are even a bit higher for you to get it right, which I think is fair and understandable, especially with the cultural climate of racism in the West and all that. For European ancestor people to be doing West African Ifa, you need to not look like a fool doing it. And so part of that looks like studying the language and really, taking to heart the training. But it's possible to go really deep without stepping into a tradition. And there are a lot of ritual advantages to have a system to work from as well. So I appreciate both sides of that. Yeah.
Yeah, for sure. I think you can get there. I think you can accomplish the same ends either way, right?
Yeah.
I think that where it gets touchy is where, you're solely working independently and within a set of spirits that has a living tradition. If you're only working independently and devoid of traditional teaching, that's where it starts to become a question mark for me about what.
Well, yeah, no, if the main powers you're working with are the orisha, at a certain point, it's like, well, here's the front door. You can try crawling in the window, but it's going to go badly. So, yeah. But if you're just working with the weird old land gods and your own ancestors, you can get away with it. Yeah.
For sure.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah. I also like the weird old land gods. There's this beautiful ravine, about a 2-minute walk from the shop, shop in Toronto, that runs through, and under there's sort of part of a buried river that used to once upon a time be up on the surface and all sorts of stuff. And there's wonderful and magical energies that are there, and really fascinating things have happened in that space over time. Like I was there dealing with something and helping somebody and making an offering essentially to the spirit of that place in the snow, right? And then when I came out of the sort of the wood part and back onto the path, all of these moths emerged, these white moths, and I'm like, there's snow on the ground and it's snowing right now. What is going on with these things? I'm like, all right, I'll take it. Big old yes from the spirits of this place on that thing, So I mean, yeah, there's some amazing stuff that can happen in those ways for sure.
Nice. Yeah.
So I mean, first thing is I'm going to ask you now where people should, like, if they listen to this and they want to think about starting it, where they should start. And I mean, I know that one of the answers is definitely they should go read your book because your book is great. But like
Sure.
for the context of our conversation today, where would you kind of point people? Where do you put people starting with that stuff?
So I'm not a very trusting person, really. So if I were to listen to this conversation and I didn't know that I'm a good person, I would go to my website, which is ancestralmedicine.org, root around there, see what the vibe is, and there are other talks or whatever, and see if you get an instinctual, this guy's not crazy vibe from where I'm coming from. And if you're drawn to the ancestral work, there are three main ways to engage. One is to connect with one of the practitioners in the directory there. And there are 30 some people at this point who are trained in the work. Men, women, genderqueer people, ancestrally diverse people, lots of opportunities for low-income sessions in 7 languages. So opportunities to connect with people directly for session work. That's the most efficient way. Another is that I offer an online course that starts in December, and that's thorough, and it maps along the heart of the book, chapters 5 through 9, which is a lineage repair work, and there's a lot of support throughout that course. So that's an option. And I'll also be offering a course through the Shift Network in the fall. And then a third way is the in-person trainings. And the last one I'm going to guide probably in North America will be in just over a week in Ottawa, the 24th to the 26th. And there's a talk on August 22nd, next Wednesday, in Ottawa as well. And all the info on that is on my site. And additionally to that, there are trainings in maybe 10 cities, and also coming up in Australia and Mexico and maybe Russia and Canada and Victoria. So, and those are led by students who I trust to guide the work. So in-person work, online course, or sessions are, in addition to the book, are the 3 main ways to plug in.
Yes. Perfect.
Yeah.
Well,
And just to say it, like, if you're wary of people, which is warranted, this approach to the work doesn't involve the practitioners or me or anybody saying, hey, this is what your grandmother says to you. It's about stepping the individual through a process of reclaiming and re-energizing their ability to connect directly with their own people. So it's an empowering approach in that way. It's not somebody getting all up in the mix and channeling messages to your people. There's nothing wrong with that. It's just not this approach. So, and especially if your family's a mess, it's useful to do ancestor work because you get some space from all that and connect with what's beautiful and trustworthy in your own blood and bone lineages. So that's grounding. It's helpful also for the cultural healing that's needed. So.
Yeah. Well, I think it can be quite liberating, because we're carrying those patterns, right?
Oh yeah. So you can relate consciously or unconsciously with your people, but you don't get to opt out of relatedness. Yeah.
Exactly, right? And if we can tidy those up and take some of that burden off of us or free ourselves from that, right, then we get to show up much differently in our life, right?
Yeah. I think of the masquerades in Yoruba culture, Egungun, and it's a blessing when they come around, but it's also a lot of people try not to be touched by them. And so it conveys something about the ancestors, like they're dangerous to avoid and they're dangerous to have around.
Yeah.
But whatever, it's just like living humans.
For sure. People are a challenge on both sides of the veil, right?
Yeah, exactly.
For sure.
So, good.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Well, thank you so much for making time today, Daniel. It's been great to hang out and chat with you.
For sure. Thanks, Andrew. Thanks for your service there. Blessings on everything you're up to. So, yeah, good.
So, folks, I hope you do go check out what Daniel's up to. Check out his book. We have it in the shop, and you can get it, as they say, wherever fine books are sold. Also, if you're interested in checking out my take on ancestral work and my Ancestral Magick Course, which is going to be launching again for the 4th iteration now on September 23rd of 2018, you can find that on the events page of the Hermit's Lamp website. There's lots of information about that, people who have taken it have found new and profound ways to connect with their ancestors and resolve some of the kinds of things we've been talking about today. So go check that out if that is your jam. All right, we'll see you soon with another episode. Thanks as always for listening.